Have you ever reached a moment in life where everything you depended on was gone? Your plans, your security, even your sense of purpose. And all you had left was the choice to either give up or keep going? This is the kind of moment where the story of Ruth begins. Long ago, during a hard season in Israel, there was a famine in the land. Crops failed, food became scarce, and families struggled to survive. In the town of Bethlehem lived a man named Elimelech, his wife Naomi, and their 2 sons. As the famine grew worse, Elimelech made a difficult decision. He took his family and left their homeland to settle in the nearby country of Moab, hoping they would find food and safety there. At first, life in Moab seemed stable, but tragedy soon followed. Elimelech died, leaving Naomi alone in a foreign land with her 2 sons. Despite her grief, Naomi held on, finding comfort in her children. In time, both sons married Moabite women. One was named Orpah, and the other was named Ruth. For a while, it seemed like Naomi's life was beginning to rebuild. But then, disaster struck again. Both of her sons died, one after the other. Naomi was now a widow who had lost her husband and her children. She had no family left to protect or provide for her. In that culture, this was one of the most vulnerable positions a woman could be in. Broken and heartache-filled, Naomi heard that the famine in Israel had ended, and that there was once again food in Bethlehem. With nothing left for her in Moab, she decided to return home. She encouraged her daughters-in-law to stay behind, return to their families, and begin new lives. She had nothing left to offer them. No future, no inheritance, no protection. Orpah wept, hugged Naomi, and eventually returned to her people. But Ruth did something unexpected. Ruth refused to leave. Naomi tried to reason with her. She told Ruth that following her would only lead to poverty and hardship. She reminded her that she had no sons left, no hope of providing Ruth with a secure future. Still, Ruth stood firm and spoke words that would echo through history. She told Naomi that she would not leave her. Wherever Naomi went, Ruth would go. Wherever Naomi lived, Ruth would live. Naomi's people would become Ruth's people, and Naomi's God would become Ruth's God. Ruth chose loyalty over comfort and love over certainty. She left her homeland, her culture, and her past behind to walk into an unknown future with a grieving woman who could offer her nothing in return. Together, Naomi and Ruth returned to Bethlehem. When Naomi arrived, the people hardly recognized her. She was no longer the woman who had left years earlier. Her pain had changed her. She told the people not to call her Naomi, which meant pleasant, but to call her Mara, which meant bitter, because her life had been filled with loss. She believed that God had turned against her. But even while Naomi felt empty and forgotten, God was quietly at work. Naomi and Ruth were poor. They had no land, no money, and no way to support themselves. To survive, Ruth went out to gather leftover grain from the fields after the harvest. This was hard labor and often humiliating, but it was the only way for them to eat. One day, Ruth happened to work in a field owned by a man named Booaz. Ruth did not know it at the time, but Booaz was a relative of Naomi's late husband. He was a respected and wealthy man known for his integrity. When Boaz arrived at the field and noticed Ruth, he asked his workers who she was. When he learned that she was the young woman who had shown such devotion to Naomi, his heart was moved. Boaz approached Ruth kindly. He told her she was safe in his field and instructed his workers not to harm her. He even told them to leave extra grain behind, so she would have more to gather. For the first time since leaving Moab, Ruth experienced generosity instead of struggle. She was overwhelmed and asked Boaz why he had shown her such kindness. Boaz replied that he had heard of everything she had done for Naomi and that her loyalty had not gone unnoticed. When Ruth returned home and told Naomi where she had worked, Naomi was stunned. She realized that Boaz was not just kind, he was a close relative, someone known as a redeemer. In their culture, a redeemer had the responsibility to help restore land and family when tragedy struck. For the first time in a long while, hope returned to Naomi's heart. Following Naomi's guidance, Ruth later approached Boaz in a humble and respectful way, asking him to take on the role of redeemer for their family. This was a moment of great risk. Boaz could have rejected her or misunderstood her intentions. Instead, Boaz responded with honor and respect. He praised Ruth for her character and courage. He told her that he was willing to redeem her family. But there was one relative closer than him who had the first right to do so. Boaz promised to settle the matter properly. The next day, Boaz met with the elders of the town. When the closer relative declined the responsibility, Boaz publicly stepped forward. Before witnesses, he redeemed Naomi's land and took Ruth as his wife. What began as a story of famine, loss, and grief turned into a story of restoration and joy. Ruth and Boaz were married, and in time, they were blessed with a son named Obed. This child brought life and laughter back into Naomi's home. The woman who once believed she was empty now held new life in her arms. But the story reaches even further than that. Obed became the father of Jesse, and Jesse became the father of King David. Generations later, from this same family line, came Jesus. A foreign widow, a broken mother-in-law, and a kind man who chose compassion became part of a story far greater than they could ever imagine. The story of Ruth reminds us that loyalty matters, kindness matters, and faithfulness in ordinary moments can change the future. Even when life feels empty, God is still working. Often quietly, often patiently, and often through people who simply choose to love. And sometimes, the greatest redemption begins with a single step of faith into the unknown.